Boris Johnson plans to boycott certain Chinese imports and to completely cancel Huawei's involvement in this country. So we have a lot to cover today. If you haven't seen the video I did earlier, if you missed it, then I'm going to repeat what I said. Apologies that I was absent the last couple of days. I'm back and I've got a new hairstyle. It's getting so long, so I thought that this is probably the best thing to do with the hair. Now, let's start because we have an update. The last video was about Dominic Cummings and the media. The latest update we have is that Boris Johnson is not going to sack Dominic Cummings despite what's been happening over the last couple of days. So he has survived. You know, this is what's happening now. But let's get into what's actually happening between the UK and China. So Boris Johnson is now planning to consider stopping certain Chinese imports into this country because of the way that this country and the West in general have been reliant on China for a long time. And he basically says that, you know, we can't just rely on one country, especially a hostile power, because, you know, it's basically not good economically, but also politically. Now, this is according to Reuters and the Times. So when you get involved with this whole thing, you kind of understand, especially in government, Boris Johnson is now saying that the plans, which have been codenamed Project Defend, include identifying Britain's main economic vulnerabilities to potentially hostile foreign governments as part of a broader new approach to national security. The newspaper reported, this is the Times, adding that the efforts are being led by the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab. So, the whole issue with this is that technology-wise, when it comes to Huawei and 5G, but also certain essential goods that come from China are now going to be monitored and questioned. So there are two working groups that have been set up as part of this project, according to the report, with one source telling the Times that the aim was to diversify supply lines to no longer depend on individual countries for non-food essentials. Boris Johnson has told lawmakers that he would take steps to protect Britain's technological base, with the government review also expected to include personal protective equipment and drugs. It's everything basically in certain areas. Now, the interesting part is actually Huawei, because Theresa May, you know, that so-called prime minister, the very incompetent prime minister we had, signed this contract and tied us to China and Huawei a few years ago. And ever since Boris become prime minister, there have been a lot of calls from the Conservative Party to review this decision because it's not safe, security reasons and privacy, because Huawei are definitely linked to the Chinese state. Simple. And now he wants to completely change that, and this is great news. So Boris Johnson has now instructed his officials to draw up plans that would see China's involvement in the UK's infrastructure scaled down to zero by 2023. So this is good. This is only, well, 2-3 years. And considering they've been very involved, it would take some time. Obviously, you can't just switch it off. It comes as Mr. Johnson is poised to visit the US for the G7 summit next month in his first trip abroad since the crisis began. Having called for the UK to become more self-sufficient and less reliant on China for goods, he is expected to ramp up trade talks with the US President Donald Trump as Brexit negotiations with the EU have become increasingly fractious. So Donald Trump was always against Huawei and China's involvement. He actually even signaled that, you know, if you don't get rid of this, we can't really trade with you guys, and the whole special relationship, the cooperation would be kind of jeopardized. This is good news that Boris Johnson has now changed his mind. Well, not necessarily changed his mind because he never actually supported it publicly, but he's now tackling it, which is good. Now, the revelation came as Downing Street revealed that ministers were in close contact with Washington over President Trump's proposal to hold a number of G7 sessions at the White House and Camp David from June the 10th to the 13th. So this will be a very, very important session, and we should be obviously covering it on this channel as usual. Now, in its latest power grab, China, on the other hand, a couple of days ago set in motion a controversial national security law for Hong Kong, bypassing its lawmakers in a move seen as an attempt to stifle the city's special freedoms. Now, all this is actually happening in Hong Kong right now, and we mentioned in the last video that the media, the mainstream media in the West, aren't really covering what's going on in Hong Kong. They don't really care. It is a massive issue, not necessarily just because of the former relationship between Britain and Hong Kong, but generally speaking, China, in terms of the power grab, they're getting out of control. So this is also important to cover in the upcoming days and weeks. Now, the Conservative Party have been pushing for this for a long time. One of the MPs, Richard Drax, said that if the UK should copy France's review of defence supply chains, the Prime Minister replied that he's absolutely right to be concerned about investment, to be concerned about the buying up of UK technology by countries that may have ulterior motives. And we are certainly bringing forward measures to ensure that we protect our technological base, and you'll be hearing a lot more about that in the next few weeks. So hopefully Downing Street should be making more statements about this. Now, on the other hand, Winnie the Pooh, President Xi of China, or Winnie the Pooh, he's now said that the countries, including Australia, the UK, and other countries that have now called for China to be punished over the recent crisis, and they need to answer questions. He said that these countries are daydreaming. So this is the country you're dealing with. This is not an ally. And the mainstream media, again, are not really concerned about this. They're more concerned about political gossip and Dominic Cummings. On the other hand, they have also been extremely biased. For example, Sky News. When it comes to the bias that the media have towards, or against the left and right every now and then, they're not really careful about what they do. So this is an example we had that, because the schools are going to be reopening in June, and some schools refuse to do it. Some teachers are kicking off. There was an interview, this is a 6 a.m. interview, with a primary school teacher, Ellie Sharp. Now, there was a lot of pressure on Twitter from ordinary people who did their research and realized who Ellie Sharp actually is. So the next interview, which was at 8 a.m., showed that Ellie Sharp is primary school teacher and union activist. Now, this wasn't good enough because, again, Sky News were hiding her true identity. 11 o'clock in the morning, finally they corrected their own mistake. Primary school teacher and momentum activist. So she's a hard left socialist posed as just a primary school teacher and, union activist. And then Sky News finally gave in and said, yes, she's a hard left socialist, basically. There's no wonder that when you look at the stats, for example, Sky News are doing so badly these days. This is according to Guido Fawkes. As recently as the end of March, official ratings agency BARP's figures show that All Out Politics, which is obviously the flagship program on Sky News, was getting over 250,000 viewers. This Wednesday, the show got less than 60,000 viewers. This 60,000, it's basically about 2-3 hours on this channel when we upload a video. And Sky News obviously have a massive mainstream platform nationally, and they also have an international kind of audience who kind of follow their website and everything. This is exactly why people are moving away from the mainstream media. When you're not only not reporting what's actually important, but also when you get distracted with plain party politics or just gossip in Westminster, the sort of things that only the Westminster bubble are interested in. Ordinary people out there are getting sick and tired of these sort of things. So this is the Sky News rating going down. Now, going back to this Dominic Cummings stuff, obviously, because we don't want to talk too much about this on this channel because, again, it's political gossip. But I saw some of the comments in the last video that I just did a couple of hours ago. Some people suggested I was supporting him. Some people said I was attacking him. I'm pretty sure I did neither. So I did clarify I was going to be objective, and as far as I know, and we know, the facts that he obviously travelled to Durham and he did self-isolate for 14 days, and that was it, and that was within the guidelines. And a lot of people didn't do it. Doesn't mean that they were following the guidelines. The guidelines were just probably not as clear to everybody, I'm guessing. But you could have done it at the time where Piers Morgan said that, oh, why can't I drive to see my parents, obviously while social distancing? You can. You literally, right now, you can. This is the phase 2 of the lifting the lockdown, you can do it, peers. So everybody needs to calm down. The press briefing that we just had earlier with Boris Johnson answering questions, every single question was about Dominic Cummings. There were no questions about what actually matters. There were no questions about the economy, the schools, people's businesses, people's livelihoods. They're not really concerned about any of that. And this is the problem we have in this country. But we are here to cover everything. I'm sorry I was absent for the past couple of days. I'm back now with a new hair. And if you want to support the channel as usual, don't forget to click on this link. Well, you can't click on it. You just have to go on the browser. The link is in the description. You could copy and paste it on your browser. I'm Tousi. I'll see you guys tomorrow with a new video.